Hi there, and welcome to our first section of the course. We'll be talking about Plato's vision of philosophy as one of the ways to sort of understand philosophy, because that's what we're trying to work on here, perspectives in philosophy. And we'll be looking at several of Plato's dialogues. The first one is the Euthyphro, which I hope you've had a chance to read, and then the Apology, and then the Gorgias, at least the first half of the Gorgias, and then the Phaedo. Okay, and the purpose again is to figure out Plato's vision. I'll be articulating that, showing you how to read these texts, showing you what these texts are saying about philosophy. It's kind of odd. I've not done an online course where reading philosophy texts is the kind of the meat of the course. So this is a little strange for me too. I'll be trying to figure out a way to make it work, to get you involved, to get you to answer questions, to test your knowledge of what you read, to talk to each other about what you read, to talk to me about it. Okay, so you can expect that. I plan to make these videos about 5 to 10 minutes long. Seems to be a kind of a limit to how much we can do in each bit, and then we'll break. There'll be a question or maybe a couple questions for you to work on, and then we'll move on to some other points. What I plan to do today is talk about just an overview of what the Euthyphro is about and what went on in there, point out some things about the text that I saw. Hopefully you're thinking about them too and reacting to them. We'll start with looking at the authors and the people in the dialogue. So here's some pictures for us to look at of Plato and Socrates, a bust of Plato, a drawing of Socrates. It looks like a lot of the busts of Socrates that are out there. Socrates lived in the 5th century BC, 470 to 399 BC. So he was about 80 years old when he died. He was a provocative figure. He lived in Athens. He seemed to have some wealth. He had a farm, but he was known as a famous conversationalist. He would wander around town talking to people about what he considered important issues in life, about how we should live and how we should think and who we should support. Plato met Socrates when Socrates was very old and Plato was very young, and Plato was very enamored with Socrates, and Socrates becomes the main protagonist of Plato's dialogues. Some of the early dialogues we think are more or less representations of Socrates' conversations that he actually had with people. Some of the later ones, we think that at this point, Plato is developing his own ideas and maybe putting words in the Socrates' mouth. We will be looking at some of the earlier dialogues. In fact, the Euthyphro is, if you look at the classical organization of all Plato's dialogues, the Euthyphro is actually the first dialogue that comes, and the Apology is the very second. So if they're arranged in any chronological way, and they may not be, these are very early dialogues that Plato wrote. Plato has a vision for philosophy. So for philosophy, in some sense, is trying to learn the truth about things, trying to become wise. It's got a lot to do with thinking correctly, setting up arguments, as we will learn as we move through this course. But there's also a vision that comes with each philosopher's philosophy. And this is Plato's vision. It's a high vision and it's attractive. Okay, it may not be right. You don't have to believe it. Okay, and so if you disagree with it, if you find it compelling, great. If you find it wrong, then rather than just sort of disagree, you should think about the question: what would be the alternatives? How would you articulate philosophy? And as we go through the course, we'll start looking at some different visions for what philosophy is or can be. Okay, Socrates and Euthyphro, they meet outside a courthouse. Here's a courthouse here. I imagine them walking up these steps. A lot of courthouses pretty much look the same this way. and bumping into each other. And it turns out they're both going to court. Socrates is on his way to court for the trial that we will read about in the Apology. Euthyphro, we find out, is going to prosecute his father for murder. So a brief breakdown as I see it. Okay, we got this introduction, kind of an introductory part. Then the discussion moves to a question about the nature of piety. And that's what a definition tries to articulate, the nature or the essence of something. That's at least a philosophical definition. And Euthyphro offers 3 different definitions that they discuss, and they end up deciding together that they aren't quite what they need. And Socrates offers the last 2. Euthyphro, for some reason, changes the subject, moves away from them, doesn't see them as relevant to his life for whatever reason, something we need to talk about. Socrates here is talking about why he's at court. So he says here that Meletus, this is the he talks about at the beginning, is trying him for corruption of the youth. I fancy, Socrates says, that Meletus must be a wise man, and seeing that I am the reverse of a wise man, he has found me out. This is an example of Socratic irony. So irony is when you say something, but you mean the opposite. Socrates likely means the opposite of that he thinks he's a wise man. We'll see why or in what sense in the Apology, and suspects that Meletus is not a wise man. People that reading the dialogue would have known about this. As far as Euthyphro is concerned, here's the passage that Euthyphro talks about why he's at court. And he's at court to try his father for murder. It turns out that one of his father's servants had got into a drunken, passionate quarrel with the domestic servant and killed him. His father had the servant bound hand and foot, thrown in the ditch, and went to get a diviner, that's what it says, so that he could figure out what to do with him. But he didn't take care of him in the ditch, and the man died in the ditch. And now he's going to try his father, as he says, for murder. That's the words that he uses. Okay, this is probably not murder. We wouldn't consider this a murder. There's no intention here. There's maybe negligence at the most. His father may be guilty of something here. But certainly Euthyphro has overstated the case. And Socrates wants us to think that, I think. Good heavens, he says, is your knowledge of religion and of things pious and impious so very exact that supposing the circumstances to be as you state them, you are not afraid lest you too may be doing an impious thing and bringing an action against your father. And this sets up the dialogue. Euthyphro answers back saying, well, yeah, I am an expert on this. I know what I'm doing. And that engenders the discussion. An important piece of the discussion is that they agree that piety is some sort of a idea, pattern, a form, an essence, a nature of pious acts. They all have piety in some. What that means is not totally clear, but that it's true is certainly agreed about by all of them. So we can talk about piety without talking about particular pious actions. And then we can turn around and use that definition of piety to judge whether what we're doing fits the bill or not. So here's a piece about wisdom that philosophy hopes to offer people who are otherwise not aware of what's going on. Euthyphro offers 3 definitions of piety. Okay, he is struggling a little bit. The first one, he's just definitions of piety again. It's not his definition, it's just examples. And he and Socrates quickly realize, or Socrates realizes this for him, that this is just an example. Then he turns to something a little more substantial, talking about the relationship between the gods' view and what the gods love and what's dear to the gods, as he says, and the pious action. After a bit of a false start, because gods disagree, Euthyphro gets it and says, well, we have to have total God agreement about whether something is pious or not for it to be pious. This is a little bit of a longer discussion, and Sometimes students find it a little bit hairy, but what they're talking about here is whether the attitude of the gods is something that is the cause of piety or something that is the effect of piety. And Euthyphro too is struggling a little bit to figure out Socrates' point. But I think the long and short of it is once we realize that we're talking about what's either a cause or either an effect of piety, we realize that we're not talking about piety as such. We're not defining piety, but we're talking about piety's role in the world. Okay, so again, we haven't got a definition. So that's a little bit concerning to Euthyphro. He's a little put off with it. And Socrates, in a sense, takes over. This is one of the passages where he describes Socrates as a daedalus and making arguments move around. And Socrates comes back and says, I perceive that you are lazy. I will myself endeavor to show you how you might instruct me. Now, notice this. This is more irony. So Socrates had said, please teach me about piety. And Euthyphro gives up teaching him. And then Socrates says, okay, well, I'm going to teach you how to teach me. Okay, it's almost a joke, isn't it? And Socrates offers one definition, whether it's just action. Later on, they change, whether it's knowledge of some kind. And after that, the dialogue doesn't seem to go anywhere. Euthyphro breaks it off. He says, I'm in a hurry and I must go now. And Socrates leaves with this comment, will you leave me in despair? I was hoping you would instruct me about the nature of piety. It's almost an insult, isn't it? Is Socrates being snarky? Is he really being fair? That's something I think we need to come back to. Okay, so that's a dialogue. I can see we're a little bit over our 10 minutes. So let's break it off there. And I'll ask you a couple questions about the dialogue, and then we'll come back and talk about some significant points that I find in it.